power due to his oppression, etc., that he has put his people through. At the start of the war, US officials argued that Iraq was producing weapons of mass destruction, which would pose an immediate threat to the security and interest of the United States, Europe and other nations of the Middle East. This intelligence was supported by British intelligence. Furthermore, Russian intelligence linked with Iraq terrorism and opposed the war in Iraq. According to a French academic, from the 3rd of January 2000, from the 3rd of January and the 12th of April 2003, 36 million across the globe took part in almost 3,000 protests against the war in Iraq, the demonstration on February 15, 2002 being the largest. In March 2003, UN weapons inspectors Hans Blix reported in reference to Iraq that no evidence of forbidden activities has been found so far, saying that progress was made in inspections which would continue. However, the US government announced that they would proceed in the coalition of allied countries named the Coalition of the Willing.
American-Cuban relationship and the early relations between North American mainland and the Spanish colony of Cuba began in the early 18th century. Cuba became the main trader of legal and legal tobacco and sugar production to the USA. During this period, Cuban merchants increasingly travelled to Northern American ports, establishing trade contact. By 1877, the United States accounted for 82% of Cuba's total exports, which is for a amount if you agree. Independence in Cuba. As Cuba's resistance to Spanish rule grew, rebels fighting for independence attempted to get support from US President Elias Grant. However, Grant declined the Cuban government nationalised American properties. The American government took countermeasures, resulting in prohibition of all exports to Cuba on October 19, 1960. Cuba began to consolidate trade relations with the Soviet Union, leading to the US break-off of all remaining official diplomatic relations. In 1961, Cuba resisted an armed invasion of about 1,500 CIA-trained Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs. The US began with the formulation of new plans aimed at
Khan would prove to be a strong instrument for the Soviet military. With the CIA funding, who opposed the government, they hoped it would keep the Soviets at bay. However, in 1979, under President Jimmy Carter, American intelligence set up its biggest operation. Its main aim was to fund the Mujahideen, a then radical Islamic group. Intelligence also aided the guerrilla army with specialist training, supplying weaponry and technology. The program then expanded following the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in 1979. It was believed under President Reagan funding reached levels of $600 million a year. By the autumn of 1979, Islamic radicals, armed and organised by the US and Pakistan, were fighting eastern Afghanistan. The CIA continued to fund the Mujahideen insurgency in order to draw the Russians into Afghanistan and counter the Soviets' influence on the oil-rich Persian Gulf. While a country in civil strife and critically unstable on the border, the Soviets invaded in 1979 with weapons such as the Stinger surface-to-air missiles. In 1985, the US created a legislature that allowed the CIA to operate covertly, entering Afghanistan and establishing its own secret relationships with Afghan fighters. On the 20th of July 1978, Soviet troops withdrew from Afghanistan, and the CIA's objective was now to topple the government of Mohammad Nasrallah, which had been formed under the Soviet occupation. However, the Mujahideen did not establish its own united government, and many of the anti-Taliban fighters, ending in the seizure of Kabul and the overthrowing of the Taliban government, with many local warlords switching allegiance from the Taliban to the Northern Alliance. At the start of 2007, reports of the Taliban's increasing presence in Afghanistan led the US to consider longer tours of duty and even an increase in troop numbers. I found this topic as just a glimpse of a highly secretive subject, and what's clear and evident from the complexity and sensitivity of the relationship that holds these two nations together. It's clear that today more and more lives are at stake. Individuals who are fighting for what they believe in, be it jihad or democracy. Is it fair to impose Western rules on a society that finds it hard to accept them, or should these notions be enforced to ensure no innocent lives are lost due to the nature of some beliefs?
Thanks, Lucy.
And it's going to mainly focus on gun politics because that's the most controversial in America. And we all know it's a pretty aggressive country, but you probably didn't know that up to 60% of Americans believe it's their duty to have weapons in the household, and 53% of them think that it's necessary for the protection This actually links in with the Constitution, called the Second Amendment, which specifically states that it is every American's right to own a gun. And this is pretty paranoid because the Second Amendment actually states that it's to protect themselves from their own government. So the US, despite being as jingoistic as many believe it is, they believe that one day might be called upon them to defend themselves against the force of their own government. But many Americans don't realise that it's this law that means people who may well use the guns for things other than their own defence can legally have a gun. But guns are just part of America's crime problem.
Very common media figure due to the fact that he's attempting to become the president of the USA. If you followed the news or read the newspapers, you'll be aware that he's recently won the battle against the respect and law review throughout America. When Obama was chosen, he became the first African American to achieve this position, and this gained him a lot of publicity. From this publicity, Obama was encouraged to write his own book. Obama subsequently has penned 2 books, Dreams from My Father, A Story of Race and Inheritance in 1995, and The Audacity on Hope, Thoughts on Reclaiming the American Dream in 2006, both of which became New York Times bestsellers and both spoken versions earned Barack Grammy Awards. Reasons why people feel that they are desperate for change. Obama appears to be that change. He's like a breath of fresh air to the people of America. He's been described as having the everyman image, where every man can relate to them in their own way, and that he appeals to every individual in his own way. You cannot deny Obama is charismatic, and yet he has received the backing of many celebrities and other powerful people, Bill Clinton and Al Gore being examples. Bruce Springsteen recently said, he's the best speaker I have heard since Kennedy.
Roosevelt, who was the 32nd President of the United States of America. He was President from 1933 to 1945, and he was only President to be elected for 4 terms of office, even though he died before he could complete his 4th term. Roosevelt was born on January the 30th, 1882 in the town of Hyde Park in New York State. His 5th cousin was Theodore Roosevelt, who was a president from 1901 to 1909. Roosevelt admired his cousin greatly, and it's been cited he was one of the main reasons for Roosevelt becoming president. In 1910, Roosevelt ran for the New York State Senate for the Hyde Park region where he was born, but despite the fact that they had not elected a Democratic representative since 1884, more than 40 years ago, Roosevelt was elected candidate. He became a leader of a group of reformers and soon became a popular figure among the New York Democrats, who would later help him to become president. He was re-elected to the New York State Senate in November 1912 and resigned from the Senate even in 1913. Shortly after this, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy by then President Woodrow Wilson. In 1918, the end of the First World War, he visited Britain and France to inspect American naval bases. Shortly after the war in 1920, he resigned from this post due to clashes with his superior. In the summer of 1921, when he was 39, he was diagnosed with polio. This meant that Roosevelt was paralysed from the waist down and had to use a wheelchair in private, even though in public he was never seen to use one, in case that damages his image to the public. Roosevelt convinced many people he was, in fact, getting better, which he believed to be essential if he was to run for public office again. In the mid-1920s, Roosevelt began to get in contact again with
The Clintons have undoubtedly had an effect on US politics when they first ran for president in 1992, and even now with Hillary Clinton run up in the Democratic presidential nominee election. Bill's time in office as president, like the most powerful country in the world, was certainly not straightforward. Bill Clinton won the 1992 presidential election for the Democrats against the Republican candidate George H.W. Bush and the independent billionaire H. Rose Perot. It has been said that Clinton's success was down to Bush compromising with the Democrats in an attempt to lower federal deficits. Bush went back on his promise not to raise taxes, this therefore hurting his approval rating, which had been in the high percent range during the First Gulf War. Clinton's election ended 12 years of Republican rule in the White House, and he was able to enjoy the windfall of the Democrats in full control of the United States Congress, the first president to do so since Jimmy Carter rule in the 1970s. In all 8 years of Clinton in charge, he passed 16 major legislations. These included the fact in 1996, Clinton also authorised a $100 million counter-terrorism agreement with Israel to track down and root out terrorists. Furthermore, Clinton also increased the minimum wage in August 1996 and secured the Iraq Liberator Arthur, signed the Camp David Agreement. However, this set negotiations were ultimately unsuccessful